Hello. Today I get to introduce you to Ruthie Kim, in case you haven't heard from her, fellow redhead. I was just telling a friend, I think this is going to be a very exuberant conver- conversation. And I'm thrilled to have you meet her. She is a pastor as well as a writer, speaker, and executive coach. And we're going to be finding out more about all those aspects of your life, Ruthie. But for now, would you just introduce your family to us a little bit and your ministry, and then we'll get into the legacy questions.
Yeah, Sue, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on this call with you. Yes, Ruthie Kim, originally from the UK, born and raised in a small little village in the countryside in England, and moved out to San Francisco when I was 18 years old. And
Wow.
yes, I'm sure there's a lot we can get into there. But met my husband out here. He's Korean American from New Jersey, and we've been married almost 16 years. I have two boys, 12 and 8, who just
Wow.
keep me on my toes.
Yes.
And yeah, for most of my adult life, I've been involved in inner city ministry, eventually forming my own organization, Because Justice Matters, which serves women and girls. And then right now, I'm kind of just in the middle of a pivot, a transition, stepping away from leading that organization and now moving into executive coaching. So yeah, a whole different season for me.
Would you mind just telling a little bit of the story of how you got saved and also how you got to San Francisco of all places? I mean, why didn't you stop in New York on your way over?
I know it's crazy. Well, I was raised in a Christian family, so I have one of those very kind of stereotypical gave my life to Jesus when I was 5 years old kind of stories. I remember it even at 5. I remember that moment of just
Hmm.
deciding like this is what I want for my life. And I always joke with my mom because she didn't actually believe me when I told her that I had
Hmm.
given my life to Jesus in the privacy of my own bedroom. And but then she said she'd started to notice that I changed as a person. And
Wow.
one of the things that started to happen was I used to invite friends over from my neighborhood and I would just preach the gospel to them. And it was just like
Wow.
something that I just started naturally doing. And so eventually she was like, oh, this is for real. And so really have been walking with Jesus my whole life. Like I said, born, raised in a small village. So definitely that small town kind of feel. Everybody knows everyone. Family was close by. And honestly, always thought I'd stay close to home. That
Hmm.
was sort of what my life would be to some
Hmm.
degree. And then when I was 16, my parents took me to a youth camp with our church. And so it was one of those Christian camps where, all the teenagers go off and they have their speakers and their worship and all of this amazing stuff. And there was a youth pastor there from Los Angeles. He was the speaker for the week,
Hmm.
and he was recently saved, but he had this powerful ministry in Los Angeles, working at the Dream Center and working with people living on the street and
Hmm.
the homeless and women in prostitution. And he just started sharing story after story. And every story, I just started crying harder and harder.
Hmm.
And it was just the Holy Spirit was so on me of just like, Ruthie, this is what I want for you. This is the call on your life. And I was 16. I walked out of that meeting. I went to my mom and I said, I feel like God's calling me to move to America. Like, I feel like I'm supposed to go. My mom burst into tears and was
Oh,
like, you need to follow God's call. But obviously that's a terrifying thing to hear from a child. And then over the next couple of years, I essentially just like, God, what do you have for me? Like, I feel this pull to America. People would laugh at me and make fun of me because it was like, oh, of course you want to go to America and Hollywood and,
yes.
this kind of stuff. But I just knew there was something in me. And some friends of ours were part of YWAM, Youth with a Mission, which
Oh,
is an international missions organization. And my parents actually hosted them. They did a lot of hospitality when I was a child. They hosted them for a meal and they came into our home and just started talking about their life. And I was like, wait, YWAM's in America? I could go serve with YWAM. And long story short, I wrote to a bunch of places. This was back in the day before email, where I was
right.
writing handwritten letters to people. And San Francisco, the location where was the only location that wrote me back.
Wow.
And they sent me this like black and white, crooked, photocopied, like kind of brochure. But I opened it up and I thought, this is what I want to give my life to. Like
And
this
and and
work.
was it YWAM?
It was YWAM.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
doing an inner city ministry. So
Yeah.
when you
They've had a
so
location in San Francisco.
so when you told your mom back at 16, you said not just move to America, mom, I want to work in the inner city. I feel that call because
Yeah,
that's a very specific, very
it is.
scary. It's scary to me. a scary type of ministry. No wonder she cried.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for those of us, myself, like raised in a middle class, safe, small community in the heart of England, and you start talking about, I'm going to move to the inner city of San Francisco. I mean, there were people in my life that told me not to come. They were
Wow.
like, for a number of reasons, it's not safe, you shouldn't go. People told me I had nothing to offer. What could you possibly have to offer to someone who's homeless? Like, you've lived a great life, and that was a hard pill to swallow, because there was a part of me that believed that too. There was
Sure.
a part of me that was like, what can I possibly do? But I know that God had spoken to me. He had said, I just want you to love people, Ruthie. I just want you to love people. And it sounds very simple. In hindsight, I had a massive learning curve. There was a lot I had to learn. I had a lot of wrong mindsets and ideas around what I thought I was bringing. And I came to San Francisco and I realized, wow, there's a lot I don't know, but I can love people. I can sit on the street and I can talk to them. I can hear their story. I can serve them. And that's really what God called me to.
And how did you support yourself?
Financially?
Mhm.
Yeah, people supported me. My church back
Okay.
home, friends and family, like people just got around me, said, we believe in you, we believe in the mission, and really invested in the work that I was doing. Yeah.
What is one of the things you had to learn? Because you just said you had a huge learning curve. You already knew that you
Yeah.
could love people, but what was something you had to actually have a different mindset about once you learned when you got here?
Well, I think I came into that kind of work with a very kind of savior mentality. I thought, I'm
Ah,
going to bring something, I'm going to go save the people. I'm going to bring something that they don't already have. And, over my many years of working with people living on the streets who have faced all kinds of, exploitation, violence, drugs, whatever it is, they've actually, I think, given me probably more than I've given them.
mm,
Like, I would sit and listen to their stories and I would realize that my perspective on the world was so slim,
mhm,
was uninformed about the realities of life. Like, there was so much they taught me about resilience, what it means to be gracious and generous. I'll never forget a story someone from our ministry shared of a woman who was living on the street. I mean, and she was filthy, she was dirty, she had nowhere to sleep, but she had a Safeway gift card someone
huh,
had given to her, just as
mm,
like, hey, go buy some food. And one day, some of our team walked past her, and they were inviting her to come into our ministry, to come get your nails painted, come let us love you. Like, and she said, no, I can't possibly come. But she pulled out this Safeway gift card and she handed it to our team and said, but use this for the other women.
wow.
And I thought, that level of generosity,
Mm.
of giving, like, those are the kind of things that community taught me, and so much more. And I realized, like, wow, I get to come and just be in this community with you, and not come with a sense of like, I know all the answers, because I didn't, and I don't.
Did you ever have a homeless person turn you away because they saw you as being too white or too entitled or too in the system or out of the system? I'm not sure what the word means. And did you get offended?
I think, there's a range of interactions you can have when you're, reaching people who are facing the kinds of challenges that people are facing, like drugs, homelessness, mental illness. There was great interactions where people were like super welcoming, and there were interactions where people were just like, I don't want any part of that. And I think there's always the temptation to take it personally, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with me? Like, did I
Mhm,
do something? And the reality is, again, another thing that I learned is like, you know what? Maybe they're just having a bad day. Maybe they're just going through some stuff.
mhm.
Maybe that 30 years of trauma has made it feel unsafe for them to trust people or welcome people in. So over the years, I learned that it was less about me and more about just giving people what they need in that moment. And if that's not what they needed, give them that space.
Mm, mm. Yeah, there's a gal who is always on the street next to a grocery store close to us. And when I walk the dog, she used to pet our dog and everything. And we'd have a little bit, I found out her name. And then one time I just took her a piece of cake and I said, here's some cake. She goes, I hate cake. And she was so rude. And I thought, okay, then I'm sorry. It's like, and then you're right. You can't take it personally. And you also
No,
wonder, if mental illness of course, people have to be mentally ill not to eat my cake. No, I'm kidding. But, she's been hurt and she doesn't
sure.
want to trust you. and
Sure.
and it had nothing to do with me, but I have not given her cake since that time, but
It's probably wise.
probably it was. Yeah, I sort of learned my lesson. So from working with YWAM, and then you left YWAM and started your own ministry called, I love the name, Because Justice Matters.
Yeah, so actually it was part of YWAM.
Oh,
We were an organization within YWAM, but I started that in 2008, and I did that because in my interactions on the street, working with people, I started to meet women, and what I noticed was that there was some specific challenges that women had that were not being resourced, that were not being met, and I just started to think, okay, how do I actually connect with women in ways that are meaningful for them? For example, like the kind of level of sexual trauma, abuse that women were facing was pretty unique and needed a specific response, or the fact that they were moms and they had kids or had kids with them on the street. And so there were all kinds of challenges like that. So I began to notice that. And then around the same time, I actually went through a domestic violence training with a local organization. And they had a seminar and a workshop one night. It was called Faith in Domestic Violence. And it was a number of women from faith communities sharing their story of violence, abuse, trauma, and unfortunately, the lack of response from the faith community.
mhm.
And I listened to their stories, and I reflected on my, 30 plus years in the church. And I thought, you know what? I've never heard anyone mention domestic violence from the pulpit. I've never
Mhm.
heard anyone address this issue. And someone in my group raised their hand and said, I'm so fed up with the faith community. Like nobody cares about these women that have been victims of violence. And I responded and said, I care. And it kind of fell flat, to be honest with you. It kind of fell flat.
Yeah.
Everyone just kind of looked at me and I thought, wow, it's got to be more than words. And so I left that space and I said, you know what, I'm
Mm.
going to do something. And so I started doing presentations for youth groups and churches around the issue of domestic violence. And I would sell sweatshirts, and we raised a bunch of money and we gave it to the shelter. And we said, hey, this is the faith community responding. And that was all I ever intended to do. So I was just like, I'm going to
Wow.
respond and that'll be it. And then it's kind of snowballed from there.
Do you feel like, see, when I first heard that you did this, or even since I heard you preach recently, at reality, I was up there visiting the girls, and I felt that you had, not that you have to tell us this, but that you yourself had suffered domestic violence or some sort of childhood abuse, that's where your heart was, because you spoke with such passion. And that's where I thought it came from. But no, it just came from listening to these women's stories.
You know, I think if you sit down and talk to any woman, there's a level of trauma, right, that we can all relate to from just being a woman in the world. And
Mhm.
so I think there's no, I didn't experience childhood abuse in that way, like many of those that I serve. I'm passionate about the women, their stories, but I also want to say that I think there's a lot of places where just any woman can relate to being alive in the world and being a woman and what that means, the kind of trauma, the kind of experiences that you have. I think that's a shared experience that women have, but certainly my experience has not been the same as many of the women that I've worked with. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, because I also had a golden upbringing, and
Mm,
and it can make you think that I could really never help somebody with that
mm,
without a shared experience. Yes, like just yesterday, I was sitting in church, and you know how God just sits people next to you who need to talk to you, or you need to talk to
mm,
them. And she was even two people down, but we still managed to have a great conversation after church about her situation, and I could relate to it, and I could speak into her life, and that was with
mm,
such freedom. And she's coming for coffee this Saturday and bringing her dog too, which is good. And I know we're going to be friends, or at
mm,
least I know we're going to meet at least one more time, and that's because of
mm,
our shared experience. But I don't have a shared experience with this woman 2 blocks away who sits there. Well, she used to have a dog, but I think he died. But the fact is, it's encouraging for me to hear, and I hope all you listeners also are encouraged, that you don't have to have the same kind of life to be
Yeah.
able to minister to someone who's down and out or in a different situation. You don't have to be divorced to to minister to a divorced person, because we all have felt lost. We've all felt alone. We've all felt maybe
Exactly.
not mentally abused necessarily, but we felt less than, because that's
Yeah.
that's Satan's ploy, is to make every man and woman feel less than. And Jesus is our answer to that, but we need to be the hands and feet of Jesus. So I just want to encourage you, Ruthie, that God led you, and you
Mm.
took a huge risk. I mean, I don't know anybody else who would do that. And that's not to build up your pride or anything. That's just how God led you. And there's a huge difference between hearing God's prompting and actually acting on God's prompting. And maybe
Mm.
it was because you were young and foolish, 18. But praise the Lord for the young and foolish, because when I was 15, I told my mom, well, I'll be a missionary. I'm just afraid of snakes. And sure enough, there were a couple times when snakes were very close to me, but it didn't ruin my life. And I was supposed
Mm.
to say yes to God anyway. You have one of your passions is to help people take risk. Am I reading that
Yeah.
correct? Why is that important to you?
It's important to be because I'm really passionate about people's potential.
Mm,
And that's what kind of gets me out of bed in the morning. And I know that potential is only unlocked outside of our comfort zone. Like
mm.
we have to get outside of what we can control, what we are comfortable with, what's familiar to us in order to access that potential. And so taking risks is the way we do that. So yeah,
So,
I love encouraging people to do that.
so a couple things. What you just said was the only way to unlock our potential is to get out of our
Mm.
comfort zone. Can you give me an example? Not necessarily your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think what tends to happen is we all have these comfort zones, right? We all have these, whether it's physical comfort zones, places where we work, people that we hang out with, comfort zones around who we think we are and who we can be in the world. Tend to hang out in those places. But the thing is, there's so much more inside each one of us that we only discover when we kind of get into that place of growth, get into that place of stretching, get into that place of like exploring the unknown. So we have to move past the comfort if you want to mine everything that's down there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, risk taking is how we do that. It can be small risks. It can be walking up to the lady on the street and offering a piece of cake, right? Or it can be jumping a plane at 18 years old and flying to San Francisco. Like that risk looks like a whole bunch of different things, big ones, small ones. But when we take a risk, when we get out of what's comfortable, what's familiar, and say, you know what, I'm going to go into the unknown and see what's there, very often what's there is a gift, a talent, a dream, a desire, like something that we've never unearthed before. And so that's why I'm really passionate about helping people take risks. It's not always big ones. It really is sometimes small ones. Like, hey, why don't you have that conversation? Why don't you try that new hobby? Why don't you apply for that job? Whatever it is, because it's there we discover like these parts of ourselves we don't find any other way.
Have you ever had someone that you've coached come back and say, well, I took that risk and it bombed?
That is a good question. I can't think of someone that's been like it's bombed. I can certainly think of people and my own life where it's been like, wow, I did that thing. It didn't turn out the way I thought it would. Like maybe it wasn't as successful. Maybe that person didn't have the great response when I tried that hard conversation. Maybe it wasn't exactly what I desired, but you know what? I learned something from it. I discovered that I'm more resilient than I knew I was. I discovered that I could do it on the fly, and I actually had words to say. Like, I think whether it's successful or not, there's always something to learn because it's the journey and not the destination,
Yeah. Right. And sometimes what we learn about ourselves and what we learn about God is what exactly God had in mind when we took the risk, whether or not
Exactly.
I've been to Bob Goff's Dream Big conference because my oldest daughter said, Mom, you need to be doing this. And so I'm sending you. So she spent the $3,200 and sent me. So really
Wow.
that whole process made me feel the best I could ever feel, that my daughter would say that about me. But the dreams I
Yeah.
had that I didn't really have any. That's why I told her, I don't need to go. But I went, and of course, Bob makes you say what your dreams are. So I made some up, and I'm not doing what I had said, I am in part. And also 2 years later, I said, guess what, Bob, I'm podcasting. Will you be on my podcast? And he said, yes. And he's
Wow.
proud of me. Not that he can actually remember who I am, but he is so great in doing that. But some people in the Christian community may say, why are you dreaming big? Aren't you supposed to serve God? And you and I both know that those are not opposite things. That God gives us as a human being. He gives us desires, and he gives us talents, and anything good in us is from him anyway. I agree with you. Women, I work mainly with women, and they just can sit on the curb and say, well, God, I'm not good enough, therefore I will not try this.
I think the truth is, Sue, that God has given each one of us so much more than we realize, so much more than we realize. And, you know, some people will say to me, like, well, Ruthie, you always talk about dreaming big, having faith, going after more. Why not just be content? And I think there's this beautiful place that we can exist in of gratitude and expectancy, and they hold hands together. And so I am so grateful for the life that I have, the things that God has done in me. And I'm so grateful. And I practice gratitude every day. And I believe that if God says he is who he is, that he is wanting us to partner with him to bring about redemption in the world, then there's always more. There's always more to explore. There's always more to experience. There's always more power and love and generosity. And so why would I just sit back and say, I'm just so grateful? Like, no, God, I'm grateful and I want to partner with you. I'm grateful. And are there any places that you have for me? Like, I always say to people, like, I don't want to leave anything on the table. I don't want to get to heaven and look at this banquet table of goodness and abundance and blessing and provision and dreams and be like, wait, that was all for me? I just didn't believe. I just didn't know it was possible. Like, I would be so disappointed with that. So I'm just always going after the next thing that God has for me, whilst also trying to be present and practicing gratitude. And I think those are disciplines that we have to lean into both directions, you know?
Right. Yeah, that's called faith. And it's it's called trust. And it's accepting what God has given us. And even when we're disappointed in life, because there's lots of people who are listening right now who have felt disappointed in life, and then they carry it over even subconsciously to being disappointed in God. And I love to speak to Ephesians 3:20. I know you're familiar with it, that now unto him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think. That's dreaming big. That's the faith basis of dreaming big. What counsel can you offer the listener who would rather not take a risk for God?
Well, I would just say that, you know, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. If you're not in a situation outside of your control, then you're never going to get to experience the miracles, the breakthrough, the only God kind of moments. So I would just say to people, if you're content with life, if you don't want to experience what it's like to see God come through for you and have a crazy God story, then sure, don't take a risk. But if you want to experience the God of the Bible, if you want the testimony, if you want the breakthrough, if you want to impact the world, then you are going to have to take a risk. You're going to have to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. You're going to have to exercise faith. But the good news is when we do that, God meets us. God meets us in such powerful, incredible ways that we are never left wanting and thinking, oh, I put more effort in than God did. Like, God always over meets us, you know, in his provision and in his breakthrough and all of those things. So I would say, you know, if you want a boring life, don't take risks. But if you want to live filled with the Spirit and seeing God do amazing things, then I definitely think taking risks is the way to go.
I heard Bernie May, former director of Wycliffe Bible Translators, speak to a bunch of us young missionaries saying, take risks for God. And immediately I thought, but the bigger risk is not taking risks for God, because there is no risk. There is no risk with him. Now I could say that, but to feel it when you're stepping out of the boat, that's scary. But when you step out of the boat, and as you say, God always over meets us. As I look back on my life, I'm going to be 70 on Wednesday. And I can now say with full assurance, he over meets me. It makes me kind of cry. Now, I love the quote on your website. Don't underestimate hope. Hope is fierce. Women need hope, don't they? So many women need hope. It carries us through the night until the morning comes. Tell me a little bit about that quote.
That quote was from a sermon I preached a few years ago, and I was preaching about hope. And what I was trying to confront was this idea that sometimes hope feels so powerless. I just hope. I hope something happens. Or sometimes it's embarrassing to admit that we're hoping, like,
Right.
oh, you're 50 and you're still hoping to be married. Oh, that's cute. Like, oh, you're still hoping to have a baby. That's cute. Like it can feel kind of like, am I foolish for hoping? And
Right.
essentially what I was saying in that sermon was like, no, hope is fierce. Like hope is what like gets us through the night and says, I can live through this. It tethers us to something beyond ourselves and says, kind of tying into that same thing of there is more. I don't exactly know what it looks like, but I'm hoping for it and I'm believing for it. And so that I put that quote on my website because I do believe that as women, we do need to hope. I don't think it's foolish. I don't think it's something we should be ashamed of. I don't think it's something we should be embarrassed when we're hoping for big things and putting our trust in God.
That is so great. That sort of goes into the legacy. And what legacy do you want people to know from you, from having loved and lived alongside of you? What kind of legacy do you want to make sure they know that the life that you're living?
Well, I mean, I think we've kind of covered it in a
Yes.
roundabout way, but for me, it's the legacy of unlocking potential. That's what I get really passionate about. For me, I just want to help people, whether it's my children, my husband, my community, the people that I coach, or the women that I serve. I want them to see that every single one of us has more than we think we have. And there are places in us where things lie dormant and hidden, like gold to be mined, where it's like, okay, how can I help you unlock that? Because the reality is that we are all locked up in some way, shape, or form, whether it's fear, whether it's insecurity, like whatever it is. I want to help people unlock that. I think about my own pastor, Dave Lomas at Reality San Francisco. He invited me to start preaching at the church when I was in my mid-30s. I had lived about 35 years of my life without any sense that I could preach a sermon. I had no desire to even preach a sermon. I'd love to teach in small groups and stuff, but I never crossed my mind that I would one day teach regularly in our community. But he saw something in me and said, I want to make a way for that to be possible. And I think that's what we're all called to with each other. That's what I love to do, is like, I see something in you. I see a gift. I see something stirring. I see a dream. Like, how can I make a way for you? And so he gave me the pulpit and he gave me his endorsement and he cheered me on. And I've had so many people like that in my life. And we all need people like that, because when we're isolated, we can't see the full picture of who God's called us to be. And so it's a joy for me just to really dream about having that legacy of like, how do I just unlock potential? How do I help people tap into those hidden places and unlock those dreams?
And of course, if you're interested in being coached by Ruthie, just go to her website, ruthiekim.com. What changes did you have to make, or obstacles did you need to overcome to make this happen? Your legacy of unlocking potential.
Yeah. Okay, three things that come to mind. One of them was community. So that story that I just shared about Dave, I fully believe that there are parts of us that are only unlocked in community.
Wow.
I think that we need somebody else on the journey with us. We're just designed for community. We're designed for family. And so whether that is a coach, whether that is a friend, whether that is a partner, whoever that is, we need someone in our life. And for me personally, I have had to chase that down. Like right now, I have my own coach that works with me, and she has changed my life. Now she would say, because she's a good coach, she'd say, no, you've changed your life, Ruthie. I've just cheered you on. But
yes,
she has been an amazing coach because she has challenged me. She's helped me see things. She's stretched me. She's not taken my excuses, but she's pressed in so that I can grow and become more of who God designed me to be. So community, we need that. And that's something I've had to embrace. I have a default to doing things by myself. I'm somewhat independent. My mom told me that when I was 2 years old, and that is just kind of my natural default. So I've had to lean into like, okay, I need people. Help me get unlocked. Help me with this thing. I think the other thing too is fear. I've had to deal with fear. For a long time, I think I thought, oh, you just get to a place where you don't feel scared anymore, right? And I realized that's not true at all. You just do it scared.
You do it scared.
Like,
yeah.
If you want to see those amazing, beautiful things in your life, you just do it scared. And so I think that's one of the things that has been important for me to like address and face in my life. And then the other one was comfort. And for me, the comfort was around control. It was like, I'm really comfortable here in the world that I can control, the relationships I know. And God's really had to press in, especially in the last couple of years, like, Ruthie, I want you to release control. I want you to surrender. I want you to trust me. And it's only then that you're going to be able to unlock your own potential and the potential of others. So I think those three things have been really crucial for me.
Wow. So great. Well, my podcast and my, the theme of my life is God's welcoming heart. So how do you see your life as embodying the welcome heart of God?
I think Sue, I don't know if there's nothing, I don't think there's anything, in my opinion, more inviting, more welcoming than saying to someone, I believe in you. And that's what I get to do, because I believe in potential and that everybody has it. I get to look at everyone and say, I believe in you. So whether you are a young girl growing up in the inner city, not sure of how she's going to build the life she dreams of, whether you are a woman homeless on the street, whether you are a CEO of a tech company leading something, significant here in San Francisco, wherever you find yourself, I can look at you and say, I believe in you, because I believe what God has put in you is good. And I think that receiving that, being on the receiving end of somebody saying, I believe in you, just immediately dismantles all of like the walls and the distance and makes somebody lean in and ask the question, why? Why do you believe in me? What do you see? What's possible? Then there you have a moment of connection and an opportunity to show people like God loves you. God's for you. God's put so much good stuff in you. Let me help you see that. Let me help you unpack that.
Do you ever coach non-believers?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you just tell them God loves them and has a wonderful plan for their life, and they go, who's God?
I believe that everybody has potential. And so I just love that process of unlocking that. It doesn't matter who they are. Yeah.
Of course. And tell us about the Golden Retreat. Is this your first one that you planned? Is this your first?
This is the first Golden Retreat. It's not my first retreat. I have done retreats for women in the past, but this is a retreat that I'm hosting in Maui in September. It's called Golden. And essentially, God started to speak to me last year about what do women need coming out of the pandemic. Like this has been a hard 2 years. And prior to COVID, we were exhausted. We had too many responsibilities. We were juggling too many things. And now we just had 2 years of a global pandemic, which has left people anxious and even more exhausted, and life feels even more uncertain. And so God was like, Ruthie, I want you to create a space that women can step into, a weekend they can step into where they can experience other people pouring into them. What I find when I talk with women, Sue, and I'm sure you two do as well, they're constantly giving out. They're pouring into their kids, their spouse, their business, their community. They're holding all of the things together. Well, who's holding them? Like, who's creating space for them, And so God was just like, create a space where women can just come and be held, experience the community of other women, be poured into. So it's going to be an event that's going to be, there's going to be teaching and worship and pool time and, breakout sessions and all that good stuff. But really is a space where women can come and experience God and rest and be restored and hopefully launched forward into this next season of their life.
What's the last day for registration deadline?
Oh, that's a great question. Right up until about the second week of September.
Oh, okay. So they have the summer to think about, pray about it, and save for it.
But the price is going up on July 4th.
Okay.
So I would say if anyone is interested, get your ticket before July 4th.
Totally, price going up. Okay, I will leave the links in the show notes, everybody, so don't worry about it. And my last question is, everybody here today can receive a beautiful PDF from Ruthie Kim called Living in Pursuit of God, 20 Practices from 20 Years. Tell me a little bit about that, because I'll link to that and everybody can run that off for themselves, and it's free, right?
Yeah, it's on my website. You just join my mailing list and you're going to get that sent right into your email. And essentially what I did is I sat down and I thought, I've been in full-time ministry in San Francisco for 20 years. What have I learned? And I really wrote down in brief, to the point, concise, but I think really robust 20 practices, 20 ways that I have found help me pursue God and live into the life that he's called me to.
I can't wait to see it. I just wrote 70 things I learned in 70 years. Not quite as to the point. I'll send you a copy on Wednesday.
Awesome.
Anyway, well, Ruthie, this has been a delight, as I knew it would would be. And everybody can find you at ruthiekim.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sue.